This is your daily dose of all things royal. Welcome back, my gorgeous, good-looking friends. Back in the news again. I'm pretty sure you already saw this 5 days ago. African parks and Prince Harry and the scandal that's going on there. Now, I didn't want to talk about this because I felt like, what would be the point to doing so since everybody already knows this and clearly Harry's not going anywhere. And the reason why is because Harry is not currently affecting African parks financially yet. In this video, I'm going to explain to you what needs to be done so we can stop these atrocities happening to the Baka people. So, Survival International is back in the news again, and this is the advocacy group who expose these abuses happening to the indigenous people of lands that African Parks has involvement with. And they posted on Facebook 2 days ago saying, Prince Harry appeared at a fundraiser for African Parks last week. Why should you care? They write, African park rangers have been involved in the oppression and abuse of the indigenous Baka people. So we've been calling on the prince to resign his position and to help end the abuse of Baka people whose ancestral lands were taken over for Odzala-Kooa National Park. It goes on to say, even now, the problems on the ground have not been solved. On learning of the prince's renewed involvement in the organization, a Baka leader told Survival, if they say they have fixed the situation, it's a lie. They're deceiving people over there. We don't work with them. The way the African parks treat us here is violent. We're protecting the leader's identity as the Baka continue to face abuse by African park rangers while being denied access to their own land. Survival's director, Carolyn Pierce, says it's outrageous to see Harry's continued support to African parks despite the horrific human rights abuses committed by its rangers against the Baka, even after they were confirmed by the investigation it commissioned. African Parks has so far stubbornly refused to address the real root of the problem, that their model of fortress conservation is a colonialist and racist one that rests on kicking out the indigenous peoples whose land it is, while outsiders take control. If there is not a fundamental change in this conservation model, the Baka will be destroyed as a people. So once again, TRG has been proven right. Quelle surprise. For almost 3 years now, I've been talking about this eco-colonialism that Harry is participating in under the guise of conservation and using his travelists to promote this so-called luxury tourism under the guise of saving the planet, trying to look like he's a philanthropist with these billionaires. They're all doing it, but not really acknowledging what it is. This is colonizing the continent of Africa and its resources. And what we're seeing here is the indigenous people are being robbed of not only their lands, but their ability to exist. If you think Prince Harry and the royal family, which includes Prince William, gives a shit about these people, think again. This saving the planet garbage has always been about money. Some of you may or may not remember, if you saw this video that you're seeing right in front of you, titled Do Not Pass Go, Do Not Collect $200, New scandal brewing, Prince Harry's involvement with African parks is worse than you can imagine, which I talk about $100 million injection into the organization as Harry took over as president, and somehow 30 million just vanished into the ether under Harry's watch with no explanation. I strongly encourage everybody to go back and revisit that video. But moving on. Indeed, an investigation was done by a firm led by Sherry Blair. And for those that don't know who Sherry Blair is, she is the wife of former Prime Minister Tony Blair. No, that's not suspicious. Anyhow, investigative frontline journalist covering indigenous resistance worldwide, Brandy Moran, posted on her Substack yesterday, African Parks Rangers essayed, tortured, and beat the Baka people. This is not a rumor. A formal investigation by Sherry Blair's law firm, Omnia Strategy, confirmed it. African Parks itself acknowledged it in May 2025. Human rights abuses have occurred, and we deeply regret the pain and suffering caused to the victims. But here is what that investigation actually looked like on the ground. Survival International received reports that African Parks guards were intimidating Baka people before investigators even arrived. At least 2 Baka individuals who had come forward with information about abuses were confronted by park rangers who questioned why they were reporting and threatened them. When the investigators did arrive to interview Baka victims, they came in an African Parks vehicle accompanied by a Congolese government official. Think about what that means. The people sent to document the abuse arrived in the vehicle of the organization doing the abusing. The chilling effect on Baka witnesses speaking openly was not a risk. It was the point. And while that investigation was still ongoing, while African Parks was performing accountability for the world, Survival International received reports of a group of Baka women and children being beaten by African Parks rangers. One Baka woman lost her unborn child while the investigation was happening. That is not an organization trying to change. That is an organization that knows its guards can act with total impunity and has done nothing to convince them otherwise. Survival International says the problems on the ground have not been solved. Getting this useful idiot to step down and denounce what African Parks is doing is not going to change a thing. Harry is doing everything he is supposed to be doing for his pa. You don't believe me? Just stick through this video and you will see why. Yesterday, a few of you sat with me to watch this testimony by Marco Rubio in front of the House. And towards the end, there was a representative by the name of Ryan Zinke from Montana who posed this question that perked my ears up.
Congress passed a U.S. Foundation for International Conservation in the 2025 NDAA. It passed with a wide bipartisan effort. I think you probably voted for it. But as you recall, what it was really an effort to have a public-private partnership to remove anti-poaching and cut off the funds for terrorist organizations in Africa, primarily, and you know the list. But I'm concerned, obviously, on it because per the law, it said that State Department was going to establish the board in consultation with Congress. Before, and the money's already been allotted. There's a lot of money in there, and I just recently came back from Africa, and it's happening every day that the poaching activities are again funding the terrorist organizations who are going out. And what I'd like is a commitment from the State Department to move forward on appointing the board, because at the end of the day, nothing can happen until the board meets to unleash the leveraged private dollars, which are, I think, 2-to-1 ratio. That can't happen. The program is at all standstill until the State Department appoints the board in consultation with Congress, but the first step is with you. Could I have your commitment that you're going to prioritize this?
And I told others we're going to follow up on that, but I believe there's a presidential appointment role in that board, if I'm not mistaken about the, so we'll have to check with White House and personnel as well, but I'll get you an answer. The board has been the impediment. You're right.
Yeah, and my understanding of reading the law, it's the State Department appoints. Yeah, no doubt in coordination with the White House, but if you would prioritize it, because I think this program is an incredibly important and effective program because it leverages private dollars like we haven't seen in Africa, and it is a problem.
Now, I couldn't tell you the motivation behind why Ryan Zinke was the one to bring this up and ask Marco Rubio, but I'm pretty sure it has something to do with a lobbyist or one of these organizations, or somehow he has an interest in it when it comes to the wildlife and conservation and the money that can be made from what they're trying to unleash here. This is not, doing this for caring about the world. This is about money, okay? And here we have a pot of money that had been set aside under this act that was passed back in 2024 while Biden was in office. So the money's there. And from a contractual standpoint, they have to give this money out, but before they could do that, they need this council set up, and that's what they're waiting on Marco Rubio to do. And on this council that he puts together will include NGOs that were a part of this process. We'll get into that in a second, but take a guess as to which senator had been leading the charge on this. If you guess Senator Chris Coons, Harry's bestie, then you would be correct. So this act Under the guise of conservation, this act authorizes legally up to $100 million annually of the U.S. taxpayer to go towards conservation and being invested into programs that allegedly is supposed to stop poaching and, saving wildlife. Yeah, they say that grants will support local communities and indigenous peoples, managing protected areas, focusing on countries with high biodiversity. But, African Parks was saying the same thing, and look at what they're doing. If you want to understand the origins of this relationship that Harry has with a U.S. senator from Delaware, go back to this video that you see here where it says corrupted thief, and you will see the documents that expose Harry attending this summit or hosting a summit where Chris Coons was in attendance and they were talking about conservation. I believe this is where the concept of where this Foundation for International Conservation came from and how they were going to siphon more American taxpayer dollars. The Annenberg Foundation was in attendance here. So assuming this is where this idea was birthed. And fast forward into 2024, and there's this act that has money specifically allocated legally. And the driving force or caucus that was behind getting this legislation together, that would be the ICCF group. So a little bit about the ICCF group, formerly known as the International Conservation Caucus Foundation, is a Washington, D.C. based nonpartisan 501c3 educational nonprofit that serves as the secretariat and support organization for the bipartisan U.S. Congressional International Conservation Caucus, which includes more than 1/3 of Congress members and over 20 similar parliamentary conservation caucuses it helps establish and sustain worldwide. And you can bet the UK has its own. It focuses on building cross-party political will for international conservation by convening legislators, providing briefings and events on biodiversity and protected areas, and running programs such as the International Conservation Corps to support on-the-ground management of protected areas. The group maintains its own board of directors, coordinates with partner nonprofits across Latin America, Africa, Europe, and Asia, and convenes a conservation council of corporate and NGO partners, including ExxonMobil, Coca-Cola, Dow Chemical, Conservation International, and the African Wildlife Foundation. And here's the key part. To inform policymakers on conservation solutions, it was also a key advocate for the passage of the U.S. Foundation for International Conservation Act, the U.S. FICA, which is what we're talking about here in the release of this $100 million annually from the taxpayer. On their website, they proudly display the names of their partners, and as you can see here, African Parks is certainly a player here, as well as the Halo Trust and Oak Foundation. So it makes a hell of a lot of sense as to why Chris Coons is sitting with Harry in a Halo Trust event, as well as supporting Harry with African Parks. So now when you go back to this video where I talk about the $100 million injection, this is what I had to say at the time. What is important for everybody to understand here is that Harry was not with this organization from the beginning. He only joined it when he was with Meghan in 2016. Then in 2017, Harry becomes president of this organization. Mind you, he just joined in 2016. Now, if we stop and think and not be distracted by all the BS, because at that time, nobody asked the question, what qualifications did Harry have to deserve such a role? When asking ChatGPT to define the responsibilities of the president in African Parks, this is what they had to say. The president of African Parks holds a pivotal leadership role overseeing the organization's strategic direction, financial integrity, and global partnerships. So now when we go back and we look at its partners and we see that African Parks plays a role here in helping to influence policy, we also see another organization tied to the royals, and that would be the World Wildlife Fund, right there with the little panda. So King Charles was the World Wildlife Fund UK branch from 2011 all the way up to 2022, when Prince Charles ascended the throne and then just became patron of the organization. Now, while there may not be any record on file indicating that the World Wildlife Fund UK had any influence on helping support this legislation to get approved in Congress, doesn't mean that soft power hasn't been applied here. In fact, the ICCF group had honored King Charles with the Teddy Roosevelt Award that recognized his public leadership for extraordinary efforts in furtherance of international conservation. And you know who else won this award? That would be former Prime Minister Tony Blair. Yes, that would be the same Tony Blair whose wife led the investigations into this African Park scandal. So now when you look at Prince Harry and all that he's been up to here in the United States, on the down low, the stuff that the media refuses to talk about, that everybody has been suckered into believing just to keep us distracted from looking at this stuff, now it makes sense. I suspect the only reason why Harry became president of African Parks is because Charles had something to do with it. And I do believe that it all ties back to this money. Why would Prince Harry step down if back in October 2021, the U.S. House Committee on Natural Resources held an intense hearing to scrutinize the WWF regarding the same allegations that they funded, equipped, and supported park rangers who committed severe human rights abuses against indigenous peoples and local communities in Africa and Asia? Why would Harry step down if this also has been going on with the WWF? And despite the royal family's deep and decades-long involvement with this organization, they never once came out to denounce what was going on to these people or address it. That's why I said, we could scream all day long and shame Harry all day long for being connected to this organization and denounce him for not stepping up and using his platform. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter because the money is still going to come in. The only way that change will happen is if you disrupt where those funds are coming in from. And that's why it's important now that if Marco Rubio is going to be the one to decide who is on this council, and make sure that they have some type of bylaw that says that human rights abuses known to some of these organizations should immediately disqualify funds from going to certain groups that are part of projects. Because at this time, there are human rights abuses happening, and the money that's being pumped into so-called conservation to protect from poaching are the ones actually doing the abusing. They need to make sure that that doesn't happen. Otherwise, funds will not be released. And that's something that I think Marco Rubio should be well informed of and should put in the bylaws as at least one way to protect or reduce the abuse happening with the indigenous people. I think I speak for a lot of Americans. I wouldn't want my tax dollars going to projects that will end up with African parks knowing that the money is enabling the abuse of these people. Certainly not. And I think we have a right to tell Marco Rubio that we don't want that to happen. So as he's planning this council with other members, and we're going to have to see who they choose, we need to be communicating with them. We need to be voicing our opinion here and making it known of what is going on, because I highly doubt they understand what's happening here. The easiest thing for you to do is to like this video and share, as well as these other videos. The research and work, the hard part, it's done. Now it's just a question of getting it out there, and that's where you can help. Saying to Harry that he should step down is like going through one ear and out the other. They don't care, and that's what people need to understand. What they care about is losing the money. A lot of people want to see Harry removed from these charities, but you have to ask the question, is it really going to change anything? And the answer is no. But anyway, that's just some of my thoughts. I know I don't want my tax money going to any organization that Harry is connected to where these abuses are happening. And, I think we all need to pitch in and use our voices to stop it, because that's the only way we're going to get change. But what do you guys think? Definitely let me know your thoughts below. As always, I will be back with more content. But until then, please be safe, and I'll talk to you later. Bye!
It was such a fraud.